Okay, let's jump into this. Today's deep dive, we're going to look at a really interesting and, well, let's be honest, pretty blunt take on how programming is changing, especially with AI tools, like ChatGPT. Right, so you can kind of tell from the title, this isn't exactly a gentle approach. So what we want to do in this deep dive is kind of break down this source's, well, strong critique of how some people are using AI in coding, this thing the author calls vibe coding. We want to figure out what they mean by that, look at the dangers, maybe the absurdities they point out, and, get into the implications.
Okay, so right off the bat, the author defines vibe coding, and the phrase they use, it really makes you stop and think. They call it a new type of coding, when you even forget that code exists.
Forget code exists. That sounds less like coding and maybe more like, I don't know, something else. What are the hallmarks they mentioned?
Well, what really jumps out is this idea of a lack of diligence. According to the source, it's about being kind of lazy about checking the AI's work, just accepting, all the changes it suggests. And here's the kicker. If something breaks, instead of debugging like you normally would, the vibe coder just asks for random changes. Why? Because, quote, mostly it works.
Mostly it works. Wow, okay, that feels miles away from the kind of precision you'd normally associate with software development. So how does this compare to how the author thinks AI should be used?
Right, so the source definitely sees AI as a tool, a powerful assistant, maybe even a partner for a programmer. But with vibe coding, they argue the AI basically takes over completely. It turns the human not into a skilled person using a tool, but into something they pretty dramatically call a macaque.
A macaque?
Yeah, like someone just, mindlessly hitting a button when they, like what the AI spits out, sort of giving up responsibility for the code itself.
So the AI is the developer and the human supplies the vibe. And I guess this is what leads the author to call them clowns?
Yeah, the language is definitely direct. And they actually break these clowns into two types, the dangerous ones and the amusing ones.
Okay, let's start with dangerous. What makes them a risk?
So the dangerous ones, according to this source, are mainly freelancers who might be ignorant of programming basics. They haven't really learned it, or maybe they don't want to. But they're using AI to build whole applications. The author sees it as them treating AI like a cheat code for easy money. Huh. But the argument is because they lack that foundation, they can't actually tell if the code is any good. And that could put their clients' businesses at serious risk.
Right. That is serious, potentially hurting clients.
Yeah.
Okay, what about the amusing ones?
The amusing ones are described almost like a sideshow. A funny sect of AI witnesses is the phrase used. These are the folks you see, maybe online, doing what the author calls prompting tricks and shouting about how programmers are finished,
Yeah, you do see that narrative.
But the author just dismisses it as nonsense. They argue that even if AI could technically do complex stuff, there's still this huge fundamental problem.
Which leads us to the core riddle they pose, right? If AI is supposedly programming at a mid-level, how can someone they call a junior prompt master, basically a beginner with prompts, possibly evaluate if that mid-level code is actually any good?
This is really, really central to their whole argument. They use this analogy. Imagine someone who doesn't speak German trying to evaluate a complex technical document written in German. You might be able to see if the words look like words, maybe, but you have absolutely no idea if the grammar's right, if the logic holds up, if it actually does what it's supposed to do.
And I guess the pushback you always hear is, hey, I ran it.
It worked.
Yeah, it works. So what's the problem?
Right. And the source really pushes back hard on that. They argue that just running it and seeing it kind of work on the surface, that's not nearly enough for real software. Code has to fit into the bigger picture, the application architecture. That's like the blueprint of the software.
Right, the overall structure.
Exactly. It needs to follow design patterns. These are like tried and tested ways to solve common problems effectively. And it absolutely needs to be testable, easy to maintain later, and meet all sorts of performance and security goals. The claim is vibe coders, they just skip over all that critical stuff.
So the real value add of a professional isn't just making it work now, but making sure it's built well, it's solid, it fits in, and it won't fall apart later.
Precisely. And the source makes a really sharp contrast here between junior and senior developers when AI is in the mix. A senior dev with all their experience can look at AI code, critique it, fix it, refine it. They can dip the AI's output in their own expertise, basically, make sure it's quality.
Okay.
But a junior developer, Someone without that deep understanding, they literally can't tell the difference between solid code and what the author colorfully calls uh, brown substance.
Brown substance, yeah, that's vivid. Okay, they'll just take whatever the AI gives them.
Pretty much. And it's interesting. The source points out that this specific issue, juniors not being able to properly evaluate AI code, is apparently something even the authors of a book promoting vibe coding admit is a problem.
Oh, really? Even the proponents acknowledge that weakness.
Yeah, the source definitely highlights that. And while they concede, okay, maybe this vibe coding thing works for like super simple websites, maybe a landing page, the author is adamant that for serious, complex, enterprise level stuff, this evaluation gap, it's basically death for the project long term.
Okay, that's a strong warning. Let's shift to something maybe even more alarming the source talks about. The security side of things.
Yeah, this is where it gets genuinely concerning. The author shares this anecdote, apparently. The person who coined the term vibe coding had their own application hacked pretty easily, had to shut it down.
Wow.
And this leads the author to warn about, the coming wave of vibe hackers who will absolutely prey on this approach.
But hackers, figures,
Yeah.
a perfect counter.
Doesn't it? And the source describes one specific, really sneaky attack method that's emerged because of how AI generates code. They mention that these language models, sometimes they just invent names for software libraries that don't actually exist.
Make all up. Okay.
Yeah, just hallucinate a plausible sounding name. But here's the really clever, scary part. They tend to invent the same non-existent names over and over. So, hackers spotted this. What did they do? They created real malicious libraries, put Trojans and viruses in them, and gave them those exact invented names the AI likes to use.
Oh no, it's the vibe coder, trusting the AI's suggestion.
Exactly. The vibe coder gets a suggestion from the AI, doesn't check if libcool feature X is a real reputable library, just runs npm install or whatever.
And bam, they've just installed malware.
Right into their project. The author says this just opens an abyss of security problems.
That is terrifyingly smart from the hacker side. Really shows the danger of not actually understanding the pieces you're putting together.
It really does. And the source raises another security point, another kind of riddle. Can an AI that was trained on data from, say, 6 months or a year ago,
Yeah.
can it possibly know about a critical security vulnerability that was just discovered this week? Or know the absolute newest patched version of a library that fixes it?
Probably not, right? The training data is always lagging behind reality.
Exactly. So the code it generates, if you just accept it blindly, could easily be using outdated components with known severe vulnerabilities. You could be leaking user data or opening the system to attack without even realizing it.
So you're not just creating new security holes. You might be actively installing old known ones that professionals know to avoid.
Precisely. And moving beyond the immediate security stuff, the source also hits on the long-term costs, something they say these vibe clowns totally ignore. Maintainability.
Yep.
And how complexity just balloons out of control.
Maintainability, the hidden killer of so many projects. How does vibe coding mess that up?
Well, you know how software just gets more complicated over time, right? Like adding a simple button might take an hour when the project is new.
Sure.
But fast forward 2 years, after tons of features, maybe some messy code, quick fixes, adding that same button might take a week because everything's tangled up.
Yeah, the dreaded spaghetti code factor.
Exactly. Now, professional teams, they work really hard to slow down that complexity growth. They use good architecture, stick to design patterns, follow best practices. It's kind of what defines senior work. But the author argues that these inexperienced vibe coders, because they lack that discipline and understanding, they make the complexity shoot straight up. Like the graph goes at least 90 degrees vertical.
A vertical complexity curve.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like an absolute nightmare to inherit or try to fix later.
Total nightmare. Now, the source also tackles this point they found in that vibe book. They mentioned this idea of the 70% problem.
The 70%, okay, what's that?
Apparently, the book's authors claim that AI can handle about 70% of the routine boilerplate programming tasks and do it extremely quickly and effectively. And this 70% number, it gets thrown around a lot as supposed proof that we won't need traditional programmers much longer.
Right, I've definitely heard that figure used that way. What's this source's comeback to that?
Their counter is basically, okay, fine, maybe AI handles 70%, but that other 30%, that's the really hard stuff. That requires the kind of deep, senior-level problem solving that AI is actually pretty bad at. Language models are great pattern matchers, right? They simulate thought within their training data. Routine stuff, awesome. But step outside that. Novel problems, complex abstractions, they often just fall flat.
So AI is great for the grunt work, the easy stuff, but not the really challenging creative problem solving.
That's the argument. And the source points out this funny contradiction they found. They looked at actual job descriptions for vibecoders,
Yeah.
and those descriptions still required knowledge of the specific technologies being used. Like you needed to know React or Python or whatever. The author calls it a betrayal.
Yeah.
You can't just prompt. You still need the underlying knowledge to even ask the right things or understand if the AI's answer makes sense in context.
Okay, yeah, that kind of undermines the whole you don't need to know code idea. It
Yeah.
loops right back to that evaluation problem again.
It absolutely does. You need to know the tech to know if the AI's code for that tech is garbage or not. And this just reinforces the author's main point. Skilled programmers, still very, very necessary. Someone has to be in charge. Someone has to control what ChatGPT or any AI writes, especially for anything important. And the author is crystal clear that someone cannot be a vibe coder who doesn't have the fundamentals.
Okay, so if programmers aren't being eliminated, what does the author think will happen to the job? It sounds more like a shift, maybe.
Exactly, a major shift. The prediction is that AI will take over a lot of the routine stuff, the form stamping, as they put it. It'll do it much faster. So the human programmer's value, it's going to shift even more towards the really hard parts, that critical 30% or maybe even less, that AI just can't handle well.
So you become less of a code typer and more of a high-level problem solver, an architect maybe, using AI as a very powerful tool.
That seems to be the idea. And the source even speculates this might, maybe counterintuitively, actually raise the barrier to entry for programming, at least for people just looking for a quick buck. Fewer freebie seekers, as they call them, people wanting easy money without deep learning might stick around, unless, of course, they go down the vibe coder path with all the risks we talked about.
Interesting thought. Now, the source seems ready for the counter argument, right? The whole, okay, maybe vibe coding isn't perfect now, but AI will get better. It will replace programmers eventually.
Oh, yeah, they tackle that head on. And with a lot of skepticism, they basically say that prediction is often based more on, like, a feeling or maybe hype rather than solid facts or a real understanding of AI's current limits. They even mention the concept of an AI winter, just to remind people that progress in AI hasn't always been, a straight line up. There have been setbacks.
Right, it's not guaranteed exponential growth forever.
Yeah.
And they also warn about just blindly trusting what tech leaders say.
Absolutely. The source has some pretty pointed criticism about taking statements from folks like, say, Sam Altman, just at face value. They argue that, look, these people are brilliant, yes, but their job is also to sell a product, to build excitement, get people to use their stuff. To ride on your ears is the colorful phrase the author uses. Their job isn't necessarily to give you the objective, unvarnished truth about the future of an entire industry. So the message is, listen, sure, but think critically. Don't just swallow the promises whole.
Yeah, that's a really important point, separating the marketing spin from the actual engineering challenges and realities.
It really is. And that whole perspective kind of leads into the final, really provocative thought the author leaves us with. It's a good question for you, the listener, to chew on.
Yeah.
They say, okay, let's imagine the most extreme case for a second, just hypothetically. Let's say tomorrow morning, boom, all you need is prompting. Traditional programming skills are worthless.
Okay, extreme scenario.
Even in that world, who do you think is going to be more valuable on the job market?
Is it going to be the vibe coder, the person who maybe learned prompting in a couple of months and builds stuff that, might have all those hidden problems we discussed?
Or is it going to be the experienced mid-level or senior developer, someone with years of building real systems, who understands architecture, security, maintenance, all of that, who also learns prompting and can use AI as this incredibly powerful tool, but with judgment and expertise?
Yeah, when you put it like that, the second person sounds way more valuable.
Yeah.
Even in that extreme AI-only world.
That's the source's stark conclusion. The experienced developer who adds AI skills is clearly the winner. And that really brings us back to the central challenge here, doesn't it? How do you actually use these amazing new AI tools effectively? Because they are powerful. But how do you use them while keeping that critical thinking, while holding on to the fundamental knowledge about how to build good, secure, maintainable software?
Right. It's not about throwing away the craft. It's about figuring out how to integrate these new capabilities smartly.
Exactly. That seems to be the key takeaway.